Well, welcome everyone. I'm delighted to see all of you here today at Morse Hall at Yale School of Music, and I'm welcoming all of those who are with us virtually through our live stream. We're here to have a conversation with my colleague and friend, composer David Lang, a Yale professor. And our conversation topic today is on creativity, entrepreneurship, and what it means to be an artist in the 21st century. So I'm here as a faculty member at the Yale School of Music, and I also am the coordinator of career strategies. And I'm really honored to be sharing the podium with David and with some students from the Yale School of Music. And by way of background, we all know who David is, but I would just like to cite some of the examples of why he's such a beloved and successful artist of our time. He was named Musical America's Composer of the Year for the year 2013. This year, he's also been the recipient of Carnegie Hall's Debs Composers Chair, where he's curating a series. He won the Pulitzer Prize in the year 2008 for his wonderful work, The Little MatchGirl Passion, and the recording of that work was also won a Grammy Award, and he's also the founder of the Bang on a Can ensemble. So David's work spans a lot of different genres, and he's worked with people in opera, dance, film, vocalists, multimedia, and theater. So he has collaborated with musicians in all genres and in artists of all different specialties. And that's why I think he brings a unique perspective on what it means to be an artist in the 21st century. I'm thrilled that we're joined in this conversation by three students from the Yale School of Music, Ashley Smith, Dan Schlossberg, and Susanna Bartel, and I'd like them to each introduce themselves and tell us a little about yourself.
I'm Ashley. I'm a bass clarinetist, and I'm only playing new music, and I've had the privilege of performing lots of David's music.
I'm Dan, and I'm a composer and pianist in my third year at Yale School of Music, and I have had the privilege of working with David on a few occasions.
Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm a pianist, and I'm also in my third year here in the doctoral program at Yale, and I enjoy playing a lot of kinds of music, also contemporary music very much, and I'm very pleased to be here today.
Great. So let's get started. So David, what are you currently up to, and how did you get there?
Hi, first of all, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be with all these really incredible people. Thank you for the very nice introduction. You are clearly a professional. That was really lovely. I take very seriously the idea as a composer that my job is to make something in the world which didn't exist yesterday and make it happen in the world today. So I feel like one of the things that I do as a composer is I try to think of the things which might be interesting to have exist, which don't exist yet. And I spend a lot of time drinking a lot of coffee and, sitting and dreaming about things that might be good ideas or might be terrible ideas but haven't been done yet. So the piece I'm working on right now that I actually just finished the first draft of and sent off is a piece which is going to be premiered next summer in Berlin, in Birmingham, England, and in London, which is a piece for 1,000 people yelling in the street. Because someone asked me years and years ago, is there anything that you've always wanted to do that no one else would ever let you do? And the implication was that they would commission it. They said, we love your music so much, and we're going to commission this thing from you that no one else has the courage to let you do except for us because we love you so much. And so they said, what's the thing that you always want to do that no one will let you do? And I said, I've always wanted to do a piece for 1,000 people yelling in the street. And they said, we'll call you back. So the weird thing about my position now in life is that I can say whatever crazy thing I want to say, and people think I know what I am talking about. And so I've been able to figure out how to get people to let me do this piece. So that's what I'm working on right now.
That's very exciting. So David, when did you decide to become a composer?
Okay, so this story is very embarrassing a little bit, but because it tells you something about me and maybe why I am sitting here on a panel about entrepreneurship. But I was not from a family which was very interested in classical music. My father's a doctor, my mother was a librarian, and it was expected that I would be a doctor like my father. And so there was no classical music in my family at all. And one day it was raining in Los Angeles, where I grew up, and I was 9 years old. We couldn't go out and play on the playground because it was raining, and so to keep the kids quiet, they put us in the auditorium, and to shut us up, they showed a movie of a Leonard Bernstein young person's concert. And of course, all the kids are yelling and screaming and throwing everything, but I thought it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. And Leonard Bernstein is talking to the audience and talking to the audience of kids in the film audience, but I thought he was really talking to me. And he was saying, Shostakovich, they were playing Shostakovich's First Symphony, and he looked at the audience and he went, Shostakovich wrote this piece when he was 19 years old and became world famous overnight. And I thought, I have 10 years. I could do that. So I started learning everything I could about Shostakovich and learning everything I could about being a composer and learning everything I could about music. It was very confusing to my family, but somehow just the idea that a young person did something interesting and worked really hard and got someplace with it, that really excited me, and that's sort of how I ended up here.
Okay, so you were mentioning this motivation very early on, that of course it's your love for music, and of course there is the moment when you're asked as a child, so what do you want to become? And I assume for many people it was kind of weird that you wanted to become a composer, so what do you want to be for real, right? But then as you grow up, there comes this moment when you actually have to do something for real, right? So I assume there were steps in your career which you had to take as a young composer in order to get across with what you wanted to say in music. How did you feel about that? Did you encounter difficulties? Did you find that people opened up their arms for you? And the next question would be related to your experience. How do you feel about young composers today? Or how is it different? How do you think they manage to come across today compared to how you...
I think everyone's path is a little different and everyone's support is a little different. I think for most people, what happens is they learn an instrument and they fall into composition unwittingly. They, you take piano lessons and you realize, something, I'm working with this piano and I'm curious if I change these notes around. I actually think everyone composes all the time, basically, without realizing it. But, and I think especially when you learn an instrument, you try to figure out things that you can do which maybe you wished the pieces asked you to do, but the pieces you've been given didn't ask for that. For me, it was a little different because I really felt like everybody really regretted in my family that I was doing what I was doing, And I went to college as a chemistry student. I went, because I actually believed everyone that I should be pre-med like my dad. And I came from a family of, hardworking, education-oriented immigrants, and the idea was that, you should work hard and you should do something and you should start a business for yourself or have a profession for yourself, and you shouldn't do anything as precarious as music because, music is a really, it's a bad business. So. But I think what happens for a lot of us is you get curious about something and you do it without recognizing that it eventually has the power to take over your whole life. And I think the really important thing that happens is that moment where you think, I have this equilibrium here between the good decisions and the crazy decisions, and something, the crazy decisions look really good. How is it for you? I mean, you must have started very early as a pianist.
Right, well, in a way I could relate to your story because I didn't have any musicians in my family either, and it was actually mostly, or let's say even exclusively my desire that I just sort of one day decided I wanted to play the piano, not even do music, but just play the piano. And I was all of a sudden this little crazy child we didn't even own a piano, and there was a sort of a panic on my mother's side, who thought, well, she would stop in a year and I have to buy a piano, and what then? A piano, basically. So, but I was quite stubborn already then. So
So
I sort of insisted between 4 and 8, and then I started when I was 8. So
Stubbornness pays off. Yes.
So I think I kind of know this story, but who ended up? I mean, the parents needed convincing, I guess, and I mean,
I started writing music, and I had boxes full of music. And when I was 13 years old, I had written, hundreds of orchestra pieces and string quartets without ever having heard them. And I played trombone. My elementary school had a little band, and I went into the band, and I said, I want to learn how to play an instrument. And they said, what do you want to play? And I said, I want to play trumpet. And they said, well, we don't have a trumpet. And I said, I want to play oboe. And they said, we don't have an oboe. So I said, what do you have? And they said, trombone. So,
they didn't say tuba,
yeah,
right?
well, I played tuba, actually. I played basically every brass instrument when I was, by the time I was done with high school and college. But so I had these boxes full of music, and my mother didn't know what to do with it, and so my mother sort of reluctantly took me to UCLA. I grew up across the street from UCLA, and she made an appointment with the head composer at UCLA, this composer named Henri Lazaroff, who was a really intense personality. And I went in and I had this very nervous moment where he looked over all of my stuff, and we sat there silently, and I'm this 13-year-old kid, and he's just paging through my little scrawls. I mean, I didn't even know which side the beam should go on or whatever. I mean, I just was trying to write music. I was just trying to sing it to myself and write it down. And then at the end of it, he just sort of looked up and he said, would you like to be my student? And so I studied with him 2 days a week, from when I was 13 to when I went to college when I was 17. And I learned a huge amount of music from him, which was really great. So
there you were at Stanford, chemistry, pre-med, and something must have happened that got you off the pre-med track and onto the composition track.
Yeah, it was called chemistry classes. No, it's I just ended up spending much more of my time doing musical things. When I was at Stanford, I was a chemistry major, but I was playing in the orchestra. I played percussion in the orchestra. I played trombone in the marching band. I played bass trombone in the jazz band. I played horn in the symphonic winds. I played guitar in the contemporary music ensemble. I did everything that I could do about music, and I would make music all the time. It just sort of took over my life. And after a while, I realized, I'm cutting all of my science classes, and I'm spending all of my time doing music. So it just made sense to give up.
Were you still composing through that?
Yeah, I was
period?
composing through the whole thing. I was writing music for every single ensemble that I could.
Oh, right. So you talked about the moment of equilibrium where the crazy ideas and music sort of had to take over your life. When was that point? I think it was pretty early, actually. It was pretty early. But I actually was very much kind of in shock in college, because I really was raised to be a dutiful child, and my mother didn't live long enough, unfortunately, to see that I was going to, actually make a living as a composer. So it was actually very painful for me to actually have to tell my parents that I was, kind of breaking their hearts. Mm-hmm. So
how did they react?
Not well. The famous story in my family is when I was young, I had a lucky break. I got a commission from the Cleveland Orchestra when I was about 26 to do a piece for the Cleveland Orchestra, and my parents came out for this because it was a big deal. And so I did this piece, and we're in Severance Hall. It's really beautiful, and the piece is over, and we're sitting in the president's box in the balcony, and everyone is clapping at the end of the piece, and I look down, and my mother has tears in her eyes, and she motions for me to lean down. And I think, finally, I'm going to get the approval which I have craved my entire life. And, and I lean down, and she goes, there's still time to go to medical school. Which was really painful. But I understand it. You know, I have 3 children, and I think if they become professional musicians, I'm going to be unhappy about that too, actually, or at least nervous about it. Because as we all know, you know, it's a life which has a huge amount of risk. And I think one of the things that we all like about it, or at least speaking for myself, the thing that I really like about it is I like the risk. I like knowing that, that I have to use my wits, that every day is going to be a little different, that I have to figure something out, that I have to build a kind of structure for myself that doesn't exist yet. And I'm doing things which, you know, which seem really at the edge of what's possible. And I know that that's perfect for me, and I'm sure it's perfect for you, and I'm sure it's perfect for all of you. But if I look at my kids, I might look at them and just think, you know, I don't know if you want to have this kind of crazy life. Maybe you want to be an accountant or something and have a car and a pool or something, you know?
But you know, it's interesting. You talked about being stubborn. You talked about taking risks, which takes a huge amount of courage and faith. And I'd be curious to hear, for example, how you got started with Bang on a Can, because that was a pretty risky venture back then. This was, what, 26 years ago?
Yeah, actually, it came out of something much longer. You know, I started Bang on a Can with 2 other Yale composers, with Michael Gordon and Julia Wolf, and we were all composers here, right? And we were all followers of the great Yale composer Martin Bresnik, right? Martin Bresnik, I will point out, not only is my colleague here on the faculty of the School of Music and was my doctoral advisor here, but he was also my freshman advisor at Stanford, because my first year in college was his last year teaching at Stanford before he came to Yale. So he was my advisor when I was 17 years old. So all the conversations with my parents about whether or not I should be a composer were with him. You know, so my parents, you know, thought that Martin Bresnik was a bad word for a very long time because, you know, he was the one who told them that it was okay for me to write music. But Martin, you know, has this incredibly open spirit, and when I was a student here, he ran an undergraduate experimental music ensemble called Sheep's Clothing, which would do concerts all around Yale, and did an annual 12-hour, all-night-long concert from 9 at night to 9 in the morning. And every concert was different, and every concert felt strange, and everyone contributed something bizarre to the whole thing. And that was a really incredible experience for me. What happened here at Yale when we graduated, when Michael and I graduated and then Julie came here a couple of years later, we were all living in New York, and this is, you know, 1985, 1986. We would hang out every day. They're my friends, right? We would meet every single day, and we would do what young composers do all over the place, which is complain about how miserable your life is, you know? Because
Not only composers.
yeah, not only composers, yeah. Well, you know, you're young at anything, right? And there's a reason why you got into this, and you wish the world was some other way, right? Some way that would take advantage of you, or that would make it be possible for you to express yourself or do the things that are important for you. And so we would literally meet for breakfast every single day, and we would just complain about all the things that we thought should be different. And after a year of complaining, we just thought, you know, this is really tiring, you know? Wouldn't you like to change some of these things? Wouldn't you actually like to see if you can make a list of the things that you can actually fix? You know, what are the problems that actually are in your control, that you actually have the power to shape? And it was a really kind of revelatory moment, because you make a piece of music really as a kind of utopian act, right? You know, basically what you do, I assume performance is this way also, but I know for composing, what I feel is you go to the trouble of thinking about something which has never existed before. And then you think, you know, this is so new that maybe all the concert halls that have been built already aren't really built exactly for this kind of experience. And the audiences that exist to hear music, maybe they're not exactly the right audience for this particular experience. And the players who can play this kind of thing, maybe they don't have the background yet to play this kind of thing. You know, maybe there's a different kind of player that I need to involve, or maybe there's a different kind of listener who can listen to it, or a different kind of context to put it in. I mean, basically every single piece of music that you make has a different place where it will shine, where it will be played exactly right, where it will be heard exactly right. And so what we started thinking with Bang on a Can is, you know, it's your obligation then as a musician to do as many things as you can to make that world possible that will make that experience shine. And so, you know, for Bang on a Can, the situation was in the 80s, there was this huge split back then between modernist academic music and the downtown improvisation or downtown minimal music. And these sides wouldn't talk to each other. And really in New York, it felt like it was a kind of, like a bunch of war zones, basically. You know, it's like, I remember someone bringing out a music stand at the Knitting Factory and getting booed because, you know, real music isn't played from notes. And certainly, there are all sorts of things that were booed uptown and booed in all sorts of other places. You know, people felt like there was a kind of stylistic purity which had to be adhered to in each of these environments. So the weird thing about that, we felt, was that when you go uptown, you would hear a piece by Elliott Carter, and you would hear 5 pieces by people who wished they were Elliott Carter. And then if you went to the Knitting Factory, you'd hear John Zorn and 5 pieces by people who wished they were John Zorn. And we thought, wouldn't it be interesting, instead of sorting music by style, if we would sort music by some other function? And the one that we came up with was innovation. Maybe in each of these worlds, you can find the composers who are interested in doing something new and the composers who are being conservative. And there's nothing wrong with either, right? There's nothing, it's not to say that one is better than the other, but maybe if you group all the people in every scene or every style together who are trying to do something fresh that they've never done before, even if it's an experiment that fails, maybe then what you would get out of a concert wouldn't be that one style is better than another style or one composer is greater than another composer, but that innovation was a good thing. And that there are lots of people in the world who are trying new things all the time, and that new things and risk and change and experimentation and adventurousness was a virtue in itself. And that was our theory. But we also had 10,000 other ridiculous things that we tried to solve with Bang on a Can. And I'm happy to say that 27 years later, we are still here.
No, it's great because I think your first official, performance was a marathon back then, right?
Right.
A one-day marathon. And your last marathon, I believe in June, you told me you had over 10,000 people.
We had 10,000 people at the marathon last year
Right.
at the World Financial Center in New York City, yeah.
Right. So to what do you attribute the success? I mean, growth from a one-day thing back in 1987 to something that's now become just a really important part of the New York music scene.
I think a lot of times when you hear something, we're all classical musicians in this audience, right? And maybe in our listening audience too, in our viewing computer audience. We love classical music and we study classical music, which means that we love the music of the past, right? And it's really true that, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And there are these great composers who have come before us, and in order to know what we do, we learn a lot. We're really passionate about it, we're dedicated to it, and we study a lot of music, and we all love this music from the past. It's a huge part of who we are. The interesting thing about it is that when we build an environment for how we play this music, sometimes it's a really great message for our audience that we all share this great tradition and we're all part of this great past and we all know all these things. And certainly when you go to Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center and you're in a knowledgeable audience and everyone loves everything and knows the history and there can be a wonderful thing that happens. But maybe new things don't depend on your knowledge of the past. Maybe your experience of something that's never been done before, that's a risk, that's an experiment that may fail, maybe that kind of experience is fundamentally different from the experience of hearing
a Beethoven string quartet that's been filtered through history and that we all know and love. And so I think one of the things that happens for audiences is that we like contemporary music. At least we've built institutions which reward contemporary music that feels like it's going to be part of this grand historic narrative. We reward composers who feel like they are going to be geniuses, who are writing masterpieces, whose music relates to this great tradition that we all love and share. And there's lots of great music that's made like that. Again, I don't mean to say anything bad about it because that's a legitimate concern, which I think we all, we all can recognize this music and we can appreciate it. But it's not the best way to hear something that's never been done before, and it's not the best way to hear something new. So I think one of the things that we did for Bang on a Can was we tried to build an audience which didn't necessarily have that kind of worshipful relationship with classical music of the past. So for our very first concert, which was a 12-hour marathon, we decided on the marathon format because we wanted to have so many pieces on the concert that you couldn't keep them straight. We thought if you go to a concert and there are 4 pieces, you go out to the bar afterwards with your friends and you go, okay, well, let's all talk about the pieces and which one won, which one lost. I think we can all agree that third one, was the best and that fourth one hung a dog, And everybody comes to some consensus about what the music world should be. But I actually don't think that that's good for the world. I think what we need is for everyone to feel confident about his or her own opinion. And there's music which I'm going to hate, which somebody else is going to find absolutely necessary, and we have to build a world so that that person can feel good about disagreeing with me. So we thought we're going to have 12 hours of music, we're going to have 30 pieces here. You're going to come out of that concert, you're going to go to the bar, you're going to go, my favorite piece was that one, and you're going to go, sorry, I didn't hear it. I had to eat dinner sometime, I missed it. And that way you would be free to have your own opinion. We had mostly composers who were unknown. We didn't have program notes so that composers, you couldn't tell who the famous composers were from the unfamous composers. We sent out invitations. In those days, it was the days of mail, right? So we would buy mailing lists, and we didn't buy mailing lists from any music organizations. We only sent out to people who were in the art world, the dance world, the film world, the poetry world, the literature world, because we felt like if you're in the music world, either you're going to find out about this or we don't want you. If you're, because in a way we've been taught how to listen to music, to compare things and to find this decision, if I like this, it means I can't like that. We had on that first one, because we're looking at things which were revolutionary moments in music history, right? So we took a very, very early piece of Milton Babbitt and a very, very early piece of Steve Reich, and we put them next to each other. And we didn't tell the people in our audience, okay, what it means in the world is if you like one of these pieces, you're supposed to commit your life to hating the other one. We didn't tell anybody that. So both composers showed up, and both composers told a bunch of jokes, and our audience loved both pieces. And the incredible thing was that both of those composers worked really hard to make sure that they didn't see each other, talk to each other, or hear each other's piece. So if you know too much about music, there's a way in which, at least in that environment 27 years ago, you were taught to think that your choices about music should be exclusive, that to like something was to narrow your world, that to say what you believed in was to make a giant statement about all the other kinds of music you wish would disappear. And I personally hate that idea.
So actually on the performance side of it, you guys developed an ensemble that was dedicated to performing the works of you and your colleagues. But if, as a composer writing something new and you're thinking about, kind of willfully disregarding a tradition, how about performers? Like when your first concert, how did you work with them, and were people used to doing stuff like that? Or?
We actually looked around and tried to find for our first concert the kindred spirits in the performance world, people who had identified themselves as people who were committed to playing a wide range of strange music. And so, for example, we knew the bass virtuoso Robert Black. We called him up and we said, come play on our festival. We've heard you play Xenakis, Theraps. Come play it on our festival. We called anybody we could think of who had become dedicated. And we called composers and said, who plays your music the best? We called Steve Reich, who we knew, and we said, we want to do 4 organs because that's an incredibly extreme piece, and it's really rigorous, and we really want to hear it live. And we think if we don't produce it, it's going to be really hard for us to hear this piece. Who plays this piece? And he said, oh, the SEM ensemble plays my piece really well. So we hired the SEM ensemble. Basically we figured out, who these people were who had dedicated their lives to this kind of thing. Then a few years later, we realized that there were a couple people who we had called upon every single year to be part of our world. And, Evan Zaporin, so the great composer bass clarinet player, Maya Beiser, the cellist from Yale, who, Evan also from Yale, the great percussion virtuoso Steve Schick, Robert Black. We called these people Mark Stewart, electric guitar player, who actually at the time we met him was making most of his living as a new music cellist, but played electric guitar on the side. And now, of course, he's Paul Simon's music director, so it really sort of changed his life. We asked these people who had become soloists, dedicated to this weird repertoire, if just for a small time of the year we could sort of force them into this ensemble and they would play together. And that's how we started the Bang on a Can All-Stars. And that's why it's a strange lineup. It's electric guitar and clarinet and bass and drum set. And I mean, it's a weird lineup because we didn't start out by saying, well, we need a trumpet player. Who do we know who plays trumpet? If the 6 greatest people who had identified themselves that we had depended on played accordion, then the All-Stars would have been an accordion ensemble, It was really just based on who are the people who have the same passion that we have.
Following the dance question, how does it work today? When you write a piece, do you have a particular performer in mind, his musical personality, or like I'm going to write, I don't know, cello piece, so I want it performed by this person who has these choices, or
Me personally.
Right.
I write everything now basically on commission.
Yes.
So.
But then it's going to get performed by a lot of other people. So.
Yeah. So, but I think actually, I want the music to actually be useful to the person who I'm working with, and also I look at the commission as an opportunity to make a new friend, basically. So I mean, I want to work with nice people who are really good. And so part of the proposition of a piece of music is how to figure out how to become a friend with someone. So how to figure out what they're proud of, what they do, what are maybe the things that they can do that they haven't noticed about themselves that I can focus in on. But a lot of what I do when I work on a piece with somebody new is I learn as much about them as possible. And then what I do for them comes out of my trying to figure out, it's like the musical equivalent of having a cup of coffee or something, It's a conversation with my imagination of their abilities or interests.
Do you think that one of the problems then with getting audiences for new music is that the audience of classical music is generally the orchestral audience that's going to subscribe to the New York Philharmonic? How do we get, whereas most modern composers are dealing with chamber musicians and soloists and small mixed ensembles, how do we get this audience from this orchestral audience into listening to music that's not for orchestra?
Well, I'm not totally sure that that's your audience. I mean, I think I am megalomaniacal enough to think that every audience is my audience, yes. So I apologize for that. But I'm not totally sure that that every piece of music has the same listener. And I think the question shouldn't be, in general, how do I take all of my communicative skills and approach all the people with them. Yes. I think it should be how does each of my musical each part of my musical persona have a different kind of place where it makes perfect sense. And I think when I talk to young composers sometimes, I think there's this sense that that the idea of a future is to write pieces which are for everyone in the world, and to have as large an audience as possible all the time. And I actually think that it's okay to say, I'm writing a piece of music and the audience is one person. And the secret is trying to figure out who that one person is and to get that information to that one person, I mean, I have all these really silly maxims about how to live your life, right? But, bang on a can, we were in residence at Lincoln Center for 5 or 6 years, right? And so they sold all of our concerts on subscription. And so what that meant is that you would go out in the audience, you'd go out on stage before the concert and you'd look out in the audience and you'd see just by how people looked and how they sat and what they expected and how they were dressed, and you'd look at them and you'd go, you bought a ticket to this concert because you want to hear the music, and you're here at the wrong concert and you're never coming back. And you'd look at some of the people and go, you're leaving at intermission, and you're going to tell all your friends that this concert sucked. And so, the weird thing about it is it's not about the size of the audience, but it's about, I think the secret of marketing is really making sure that the people who can hear the music come and the people who can't hear the music don't.
So you're not really into wanting to change an audience's preconceived notions of what classical music is. You're not deliberately trying to get in Australia we call them a blue-haired audience,
right. Yeah.
Listening to your music. Because I know with Bang on a Can that the aim was actually to find people who are interested in modern art and modern literature, to bring that audience into the difficult thing of actually listening to modern
the interesting
music.
thing in New York is that there are plenty of blue-haired people who actually go see contemporary art. Mm-hmm. And the blue-haired people with contemporary art actually have a lot more money and are a lot more curious than the blue-haired people who go see contemporary music or go see classical music, I mean, I think that there's, the weird thing about art, which is really interesting, is that an art audience is used to the idea that the experience may be challenging.
Yes.
Every year there's or every 2 years, whatever, there's the Whitney Biennial, and people line up around the block for days to go into this thing, just so they can be offended by the art and challenged and come out and yell about how terrible it was. And then they come back the next year and they fight with each other about what it meant, and the most offensive piece was this. But people like the idea that they're part of the process, they're part of the decision-making process about how art moves forward. And I think that one of the things about the way we teach classical music, because we teach it in terms of erudition, in terms of tradition, in terms of all of this great repertoire of the past, is that we feel like we don't want an audience to feel like they're participating in the rawness of the decisions being made in front of them. But I do think, actually, if you can figure out how to get an orchestral audience to participate in that you would be able to get those people to understand that issue.
Yes.
If you were able to tell them, your ticket, your listening, your appreciation, your hearing this piece is a vote for the world you want to live in. And you're voting for something, the polls have not closed on this, right? And you're part of the voting party here. I actually do think that attitude would help to change the orchestral environment.
And what are some of the key things that you've done that has seen you find new audiences like this? Like, how have you got the people interested in modern art to confront modern music the same way? I think that's the biggest struggle we have as contemporary performers and composers is getting audiences to cross that divide.
I think a lot of it is venue.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think a lot of it is just where you do your work. You know, I think every art museum, every art gallery in the world is looking for programmatic content.
Yes.
And I think that there's a way in which when someone comes to a hall which is associated with classical music, one expects a certain kind of experience which may put some people off. So I think that there's a way in which you can go to the places where the audiences are. When we did the first Bang on a Can festival, we were looking for a place to do it. We decided we were going to do it in an art gallery in Soho. So we did it in Soho at a hip art gallery, and it had no history of doing music there, so there was no feeling that someone might have had a bad experience with music there in the past. Bang on a Can also for the last 12 years has had a music school, the Bang on a Can Summer Festival, where every year we have 35 young composers and performers from around the world who come and study with the Bang on a Can All-Stars and with a different faculty also. And it's really intense, and it's really fun, and it's really great, it's really exciting. And we had to think about where we were going to place this school, and we decided to place it in an art context because we felt like that audience was open to the idea that new work should be risky and may not always work. That's kind of an art idea. So we do this every year at Mass MoCA in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And the whole point of it is to say you're in this environment where art is challenging, and music can actually be experienced that way too.
Well, it's really interesting because, you're someone who's really honored your convictions, your courage, your voice, your experiments, and slowly you've developed the following. And so people actually love listening to your music now. And I'd be curious for you to tell us a little about, for example, Little MatchGirl Passion, which is a piece that is beloved by so many people, that has some really, really interesting themes, powerful themes. That seemed to resonate. I mean, I think you were inspired by the St. Matthew Passion by Bach, and then you mixed that with Hans Christian Andersen and then did your whole spin on that. So clearly, maybe you could tell us a little about your process and what you think appeals to people about what you do now.
I'm as curious as everybody else because I expected my house was going to get firebombed after I did Little MatchGirl Passion. But what happened was I got this commission from Paul Hillier, and so I do what I do with every commission, which is I bought every CD that he's ever put out. I went to Amazon, I ordered every CD, and I just thought, I want to see what he does well. What does he like? What does he enjoy conducting? What does he sing?
Were you supposed to write a religious piece, or
no? The piece, the point of it was to write a piece for his ensemble theater of voices. And I had no idea that it was going to be a religious piece. I started out, and I know Paul Hillier because he works with Steve Reich. He worked with John Cage. He works, he did this incredible performance of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. He worked with Luciano Berio. I knew him as a modern man. And I thought, this is why he's the composer's friend. He loves composers. I met him in a contemporary music context. He came up and said, would you like to do something with me? I said, sure. I bought all of his CDs, and I was surprised to think, here is this modern person who spent all of this time with contemporary music, who has put out 50 CDs about Jesus. He's not a religious person, but because he has a nice voice, and because he likes choral music, and because we are classical musicians and we love the music of the past, most of his work has been singing about Jesus. It's about the history of our music, which comes out of the church. That's where many of our traditions come, is that the church was our great commissioner and our great patron, and composers had religious feelings which they expressed in music and made their livings as church composers. That's where our background is. And so it just reminded me, when I bought all these CDs and listened to them, that this is something that I and many artists like me have had to deal with for all of our life, because I am not a Christian. And so what happens when you are steeped in classical music, as happens for the people here who are not believers, who are not Christians, is that you end up having to do a lot of things that are involved with someone else's commitment. So when you listen to Bach, Bach is probably, it sounds really silly for me to say it, but it's like the greatest composer ever. And this music is unbelievably powerful, and you can feel his passionate commitment to everything he believes, and you cannot help but respond to it. But when you listen to it as a Jewish artist, and I am Jewish, and you listen to a piece like the St. John Passion or whatever, you have to go, this is not good for the Jews, right? And so you're torn. I love this music so much, but there's a limit to how close I can get. So
Take on Jesus is somewhat different, let's say.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, our take is different. Well, I once got a commission to do a credo. Actually, I got a commission years and years ago to set the credo, right? From the Mass, and I said, I can only set the part of this credo which Jews agree with, right? I can only set, and there's only one line in the credo that Jews agree with, which most Jews don't even know about, which is that we believe in resurrection. So that was the only thing. So I made this incredibly weird credo, which no one understood at all. But I was thinking, it's like what are the parts of this experience of the idea of a passion, the idea of a gospel, which I can participate in. So I thought, maybe it would be possible. The thing that's actually really beautiful about those passion stories, and the beautiful thing about the story of the Gospels to begin with, is the idea that someone's suffering happened, and that suffering was so meaningful that it should change your life, and it should change your relationship to the lives of everyone around you. That just by noticing someone else's suffering, it should reorder your way of living and reorder your society. And I think if you take the Jesus thing out, that's a very powerful idea. And so I thought maybe I could make a piece of music that would highlight that, and I thought, I will take my favorite crowd scenes from the St. Matthew Passion, the text, and I would take Jesus out, and I would put someone else's suffering in. So then I put the little match girl there, the story, the Hans Christian Andersen story. And the idea was just noticing this other person, what would it do? It was sort of an experiment. Would it trivialize it? Would it make this, the little match girl story into a religious story, more religious than it already is? Would it make a substitute religious universe? Would it have the same experience? I was doing it really experimentally, and I really expected that I was going to get a lot of pushback. But I'm happy I didn't.
Oh yeah.
It did say when I won the Pulitzer, though, the chyron on Fox News was that went across the TV was composer wins Pulitzer for taking Jesus out of the gospel.
Oh, that's
I think though that is, if I may allow myself, it's a very really subtle choice because. Even if we take the gospel, we're supposed to think that Jesus can be identified in the people's suffering. So basically that he exists in the people's suffering. So even those people who want to see him can, right?
I think that's what happened. Is I think that it's become a Christmas and Easter tradition now. Right. So and actually, the Metropolitan Museum of Art did it last year as their Christmas concert, and they're doing it again. And I think their goal is to do it every year as like a new Messiah or something. And I certainly never thought that my job as a Jewish composer was, to be like Irving Berlin and make, White Christmas or something, But I wasn't trying to make a Christian standard, but anyway.
Ultimately, it's about moral values, right? And
well, that's what I
so
thought. That's
exactly.
what I thought. I thought, my life in New York is impossible if I really notice the suffering of everyone around me. Yeah. And I have to imagine that before I'm a musician, I'm a citizen, and I have to feel bad about that, And so I want to actually try to live in a world where I do this for myself. You know, I'm not trying to figure out how to write this piece of music so other people can feel a certain thing. I'm actually writing this piece of music because I'm curious how I will feel, you know? And I'm really trying to figure out, you know, it's like how it's possible to actually pay more attention to the people around you, you know? It's like it would be impossible to live if we noticed everyone suffering, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Do you think that should be an overriding aim for a 21st century composer, to actually want to try and comment on society and have a slightly moral position, or?
No.
I don't think so. What should a composer do?
I think a composer should be honest with him or herself about what he or she is curious about. I don't think there's anything wrong with the composer waking up and thinking, you know, today I want to entertain as many people as possible. Today I want to make, you know, grown men cry. Today I want to make children, you know, laugh and skip. You know, today I want to make a ton of money. Today I want to be the person who makes all rap music sound like it's produced better than it was yesterday. You know, I think that the real situation is that there are lots of places where music goes, and there are lots of places where music is needed, and there are lots of places where music is useful and necessary. And my big thing is I think that people really need to be honest with themselves about what's the part of that which most motivates them, and then be the most dedicated to doing the best job of doing that possible. You know, we did this really great project a couple years ago with Bang on a Can, which is, there's this legendary piece of ambient music by Brian Eno called Music for Airports. It's the first ambient piece, and he made it in his studio, right? He made it completely electronically in his studio. And his idea was this kind of radical idea, which was that the music that's in the background of our lives, that we take for granted, that we ignore, you know, there's more of that in the world than the music that you actually choose to listen to. So most of the music that's in our life is music that we didn't choose, right? And so his idea, which I think is really noble, is that that music that's in the background of your life should be made just as carefully and just as meticulously as the music that you choose and that you make yourself. And I love that idea, you know. I have no trouble with somebody saying, you know, I'm a commercial musician, I'm going to Hollywood, I'm gonna write the best film scores I can make, you know. I don't have a problem with that. But I think the problem comes in thinking, I'm making a piece of music that only one person in the world should hear, and I'm going to try to force everyone in the world to hear it, and how come they don't like it? Or I'm going to make a kind of music that that's the most commercial music in the world, you know, that's just about satisfying everybody, and how come nobody sees my personality in it? You know, I think that everybody needs to be honest about where their music is making us going, and that's not to say that it can't change, and it's not to say that it can't be different piece by piece. It's not to say that your curiosity can't be followed wherever it goes and whenever it goes there. But I think that the most important thing is for you to be honest with yourself about what interests you at that moment.
Well, David, it really sounds like you're an enormously intellectually curious person. And you use a lot of text-based work. You do a lot of collaboration with singers. I went to see Love Fail. I went to your talk about it, and I was really struck by how you actually put that together. The combination weaving those texts from Tristan along with Lydia Davis. So I'd be curious, first of all, how do you get some of these ideas? You know, what do you read? What do you listen to? What do you watch? And then what's your process for putting it together and creating a work of art?
Thank you. You know, again, my process is, I love being a composer, and it's really important to say that at this moment. But again, you know, it's like everyone's reason for being a composer is different, and everyone loves a different part of it. And to me, the best part of it is being able to sit in my studio and think about stuff. It's the most fun thing in the world, you know. I read a lot. I read all the time. I'm really curious. I really like to think that there are things that we can do in music which we are trained not to think about. You know, that our tradition tells us Beethoven did this really well, and Mozart did this really well, and that's the size of our field, and that's what we should do. Stravinsky, you know, was a giant who walked the earth, and the size of our world should be like this, you know? And I like to sit in my studio and think about how there are things that my background might have caused me to overlook. And that's basically the beginning of every piece. You know, all of my pieces are solving problems about things which could exist, which don't, and maybe some of them shouldn't. And I did at one point in my life write a 45-minute long piece for 2 castanets. That should not have existed. But again,
Someone else did it before,
yeah,
right?
I'm sure no one will do it again, you know?
Well, I mean, what I admire about you and what I really enjoyed about Love Fail is it seemed to dovetail a lot with your music, you know, like taking this huge work, Tristan, for goodness sake, what's that, 5 hours of Wagner, and you drilled it down to the minimal text with Lydia Davis, also a very minimalist writer, and very spare music in an hour of incredibly soul-felt music. You know, and so I thought that was a really interesting thing that you did, that experiment.
Well,
So maybe you want to tell us more about that.
Again, this came out of my relationship with the commissioners, because this piece was a project I did with the Medieval Singers Anonymous 4. The thing that happens when you write a piece of music that people like, you know, for composers in the audience, this is probably true for anybody. When you do something good, probably if you're a violinist and you play a piece of music really well and everyone hears you play this piece of music, then everyone hires you for the rest of your life to play that piece of music. Oh, can't you just do that again for us? And that may get tiring. So what happened after Little MatchGirl Passion was that, you know, I wrote this piece of vaguely religious, a cappella, pseudo-medieval, text-based, introspective a cappella thing, right? Well, it turns out there are lots of groups all around the world that specialize in this kind of a cappella, vaguely religious, you know, pseudo-medieval music. And I heard from all of them, you know. So it was really clear to me after Little MatchGirl Passion that I could, you know, like spend the rest of my life rewriting the same piece. So Anonymous 4 called me and they said, you know, we really like that piece. And I met with them and I said, what do you want to do? And they said, well, can you do that for us? And so I thought, well, you know, I'm going to think of something else. I don't want to do something religious, because I just did that, and I don't want to, you know, have people think that that's my shtick, because it's not my shtick. And I want to do something for you, so what do you do? So I listened to 25 of their CDs, right? And their CDs are, you know, almost all medieval music. There are a couple of really incredible CDs of Americana, of shape note singing, which are really great. But most of these things are these, you know, sort of very beautiful medieval things. And I thought, I'm going to figure out if I can do a piece which is about the conflict between your being modern people singing music that's 800 years old. You know, what's the conflict there? What's the conflict? And so I thought, you know, what's something that's interesting from 800 years old, right? And so I thought, well, you know, I remember I was a medieval studies minor at Stanford, and so I remember reading all these different versions of the Tristan and Isolde story. And I remember what was really interesting about them is that all the different versions disagreed with each other on a lot of details. So I thought, I wonder if I can make a piece of music not out of the Tristan story, not trying to tell the story of, you know, that we all know from Wagner, and we all know from Wagner it's the greatest love story ever, right? We've been, you know, completely told that this is the greatest love story ever, right? I'm not sure why, but this is our myth, right? You know, and so I thought maybe I could make a story not out of the plot from this thing that we all know. These two people, they're not supposed to fall in love, they drink this potion, it doesn't work out, they die miserably. You know, we know that story. But what's interesting is that all these different versions disagree with each other. So I thought, I wonder if I could just set to music all the little things that are unique to each version of the 12th century story. So there's one of them, this really beautiful story by Marie de France. That's one little instance which is famous in Tristan lore, because Tristan has been banished. He tries to get a message to Isolde. He carves his name on a stick. Tristan. He just writes Tristan on a stick, and he leaves it on the path where he thinks that she might someday go. Then he sits in the forest and waits. So sure enough, Isolde comes along. She sees the stick, and it says in the text, in this beautiful text by Marie de France, it says, and she knew exactly what he meant. And there are pages and pages and pages of this intense, very detailed message that she gets from just reading this one word carved on the stick left in the road, right? So she knows exactly what he's saying. So that's really ridiculous. And I thought, okay, that has to be in my opera. The most ridiculous one is that there's this one little scrap by this writer called Thomas à Britton. And this only appears in his story, which is that, Tristan, of course, he is forced to break up with Isolde. He goes to Brittany. He marries another woman named Isolde. I mean, every woman in this story is named Isolde, which is interesting. So, but that's another story. And so, there's only one woman, basically, yeah, and that's it. And they're all different incarnations of the same person. He gets poisoned, he gets a wound, he's about to die, and he sends for Isolde, for the real Isolde, to come and save him because her mother was a sorceress. She knows this magic potions, whatever. So she gets on a ship. And only in this one account, this incredibly beautiful story, there's a storm on the ocean. And Isolde thinks that she's going to die. She thinks the ship is going to go down. And Isolde can't believe it. She can't, and it's only in this one version, and she's dumbstruck because she goes, what? I'm supposed to die at exactly the same moment as Tristan. How can this be? We have the greatest love ever, and I'm going to drown here in the ocean? This is impossible. How can this happen? The boat is like shipping water all over the place, and it's about to go down, and she can't believe that she's going to die first. And so she goes through this thought process, and she finally goes, oh, I figured it out. I'm going to drown here. A fish is going to come along, and it's going to eat me. Years from now, Tristan is going to be sailing on this ocean, and he's going to be in a boat, and it's going to go down, and he's going to get eaten by the same fish. And then she relaxes because she goes, okay, I figured it out. We can die the same death.
Oh, great.
It's very, very beautiful and really weird. So I thought that has to be in my piece. So basically, I took these things and I strung all these little scraps together and I rewrote them completely. I took out the names of Tristan and Isolde, so it just said he and she. I took out anything that had to do with anything ancient, so that it could be a modern love story, because after all, I don't care about Tristan and Isolde. I care about my life. I care about my wife. I care about my love. I care about what happens to me. I found these stories, these beautiful stories by this great American writer named Lydia Davis. They're very short, and she has a bunch of stories which are about a woman arguing with a man. They're he and she, and there are stories also about a woman being introspective, about not being understood, and a woman about trying to find love, and a woman in frustration, and a woman not being understood. And I took these little stories and I intercut them with these little stories from Tristan that had all the Tristan part taken out. And really my whole part in doing this was this kind of overriding thing, which I thought was really important to me, which is that, I'm not interested in Tristan and Isolde, but why are we interested? Why is this the greatest love story? Why are we curious about it? And I think the reason why is because we like all these old, impossible, fairy tale, impossible to believe stories about magic potion, dragons, kings. We like these stories because the suffering that we see in there distracts us from the suffering of our lives. And so all of the reason why when we go see Tristan and Isolde is we project this on this ridiculous story. But, you know, our lives are tragic too. And our loves are tragic too. And you don't have to be a king and queen to have your love end, you know. And as I said at the talkback that night, I don't know, were you there at the talkback? Yeah, so I said this thing which was really creepy, which was really something that has always stayed with me, is that when my wife and I got married, you know, we went to City Hall, right? We just, you know, ran off to City Hall, and we're getting ready to go to City Hall, and my wife says to me, okay, you know what this means, right? You know, this is an agreement that one of us will bury the other one. And I thought that was really beautiful. I thought that was really touching. I thought that was really exactly right, you know. And so my feeling about all of this was I'm looking at all of these historical stories that Anonymous Four spends their entire life on, all these mythic, historic, religious, blown up, gigantic stories that we all love and treasure, that Wagner can, you know, make a 4-hour opera out of, or 5-hour opera or whatever. And you know something? None of those stories are as meaningful to me as the fact that my love will end, and you know something? So will yours.
So it's really interesting because you're very devoted to your ideas and what you think is important, and there's a huge resonance out there on that. And you once said something interesting to me, that if you know yourself and you're true to yourself, you'll find your audience. So I thought that was a really interesting comment.
I believe that very much. I really think, you know, you know, we have all these things in society that keep us from seeing things carefully, right? You know, we have all these compromises we have to make. We all have to go to school, we all have to earn a living, we all have to, you know, talk to people and be nice to them. And, you know, it's like there are all these compromises, right? Where can you live fully, right? You know, the only place you can live fully is in the things that you have control over, right? Well, what do you have control over? You know, in music, you know, you have control over that. You know, you have control over how much you practice and how beautiful this thing can be shaped. And, you know, it's you know, your relationship with the things that you control is the most important thing that you have. Yes. And I honestly think that when you share your work with other people, that's what people respond to. Is they respond to how honest you are with yourself. They respond to how hard you have worked to make the thing which only you are interested in, or to make the thing which you believe in. I think most people live in a world where they can't believe fully in what they do. You know, we all live in society. We live a life of compromise, you know, because that's what society is. You know, the only place where you can live fully is in a piece of music and is in art. And that's why we are useful, is because people need this message to know that it's possible to believe something. And without that knowledge, people can't live. And so I think my job as a composer is to identify the thing that I believe in the most. And that's what I respond to when other people play, when other people write. You know, I want to see what's their opinion, you know? And I think people are so hungry for other people's opinions to be expressed with strength that people will follow bad opinions that are expressed with strength. You know, I think that's, you know, that's how, I mean, these are not good things, right, necessarily. You know, music is not necessarily a good, right? I think music opens you up to receive a message, but it may be a good message or a bad message, you know? I don't think that it's, I mean, I remember this really great, this great special during all the massacres in Rwanda that was on national public radio, where they played the music that was going on. This really great music that made you want to get up and dance, and it was really exciting and it was really fun. And the newscaster said, well, let me tell you what those words are. It's get up on your feet, grab your machete and go to your neighbor and kill them, you know. So music opens you up to receive a message. And it's not always a good message. So the fact that people believe something, it may not be something that you want to follow. But I definitely feel like that's your job as an artist is to say, I believe something, and to put it out with the most commitment and strength that you can.
And you know, what's another very interesting thing? You spoke about this, you know, back in the day when Bang on a Can was first emerging, and there was this real divide between the uptown crowd and the downtown crowd. I think there's some, you know, somewhat of a nostalgia. You know, I hear people saying to me, "Oh, it was so much easier for musicians back in the day," and yet what you're saying is it was pretty polarized, and that actually, what the way we've evolved as a society is that people like you who do have something strong to say have more of an opportunity to get it out there. So I'd be interested in your views on the scene today for classically trained musicians.
That's a really interesting question. I think one of the really great things that's going on right now, which seems really odd for me to say this, is that it seems like all the predictable streams of where we can go with our talents are crumbling. So I think we spend a lot of time talking about the downfall of the orchestra, or we spend a lot of time talking about dwindling audiences. We spend time talking about how the institutions that we built aren't necessarily fulfilling their function the way we imagined them to fulfill their function, you know, 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think actually the paradox about that is that that means that there's a tremendous opportunity to build a new path that doesn't yet have an institution to support it. And I think the irony is that that having the sense that there was possible a secure future for which you could educate yourself and for which you could train and for which you could predict a future meant that there were certain parts of your life that maybe you didn't have to examine. You know, what's the kind of music that I really want to learn? Do I want to learn orchestra excerpts? Well, when orchestra was a great job and orchestras were booming and it seemed like that was the really great thing to do, everyone had to learn orchestra excerpts. Now I think that that's probably a decision that someone will make about whether or not that's a future that you would like, because that future looks a lot more iffy. So I actually think what's interesting, what I see in New York right now is there's a huge proliferation of strange places to hear music. Mm-hmm. So, and you know, every club in Brooklyn, every art gallery, every, you know, there are huge numbers of scenes that are presenting music that never presented music before, and they are getting audiences, and they are getting people. What's interesting though is I think that I hate the idea that we live in a world that says that because the institutions which already exist may not hold you, that should be a pessimism which should focus our attention for our lives. You know, I think what it says more than anything is something not about the music at all. It says something about the business model that was built that worked for a few years and doesn't work any longer. It doesn't say anything about whether or not that music deserves to move forward. You know, it's not Beethoven's fault that an orchestra may be having difficulty. That music is great, right? That music deserves to be played. And if anything, you know, that's tragic, is that we built an institution which could not figure out how to keep that model working. But that doesn't mean that that music has a problem, and it doesn't mean also that that music has any less a universal need or appeal.
Do you think, therefore, that it really comes down to conservatories and institutions where people are studying to change the framework of how we actually teach music to prepare students for entering a profession which isn't necessarily through orchestral excerpts and joining an orchestra? Is that where it starts, or where do you think this process begins?
I actually think the process begins in getting really angry about the way music is taught in kindergarten and elementary school. And I think in order to be a citizen, you know what, you know, we're all very good here, right? You know, it's like Yale, it's a fantastic school. I've heard you all play. You guys are excellent, right? You know, this is an amazing school. Everyone here is great, right? But we are nothing without an incredible ecology of people who do everything at different levels in our business, right? You know, it's like we can't live thinking that we only need 3 clarinet players and 3 composers and, you know, whatever. We need everyone in this country to know how to play an instrument. We need everyone in this country to know what music is, regardless of what kind of music they play. We need everyone in this country to get an experience with learning that music transmits something emotional that can't be transmitted any other way. And they have to get this message young, and they have to get this message early. You know, as I said earlier, you know, it's like before we are musicians, we have to be citizens. And I really think that what we need to do, you know, I can't possibly teach elementary school music, right? I have my own children, and they can tell you I have no patience for teaching them music. I am not the right person, but I give money to this, and I, you know, yell at PTA meetings, and I get frustrated, and, you know, and the fact of the matter is, we have something that we do which is precious. You know, this message that we have, this musical message, transmits something to people which cannot be transmitted any other way, you know. And also there's a way in which people are hungry for this message. People don't know it, but this kind of emotional connection that happens between people can only happen through music. And people are hungry for this. And we are fooling ourselves if we think, you know, we don't have to build an audience, we don't have to build the future, we don't have to work to find the way to get that message across, you know, that I can just be, you know, I'm going to be the greatest composer on the planet, and I'm going to write my one great piece a year, and, you know, and cash my royalty checks and sit on the beach, you know. That's going to be a very short career. You know, I think we're, and so I think that that's really where I would put the energy. You know, I think by the time we're in conservatory, we're already, you know, a very rarefied part of the music world, but we're not really where the future of the field is. You know, we are the people who serve the future of the field. The future of the field comes from what it means to society. And we have to be involved with that message.
Yes.
So you mentioned teaching, and this is so school, and one of your activities is teaching at this school. So I was wondering how, or to what extent you mentioned your own teacher. Do you teach composition? Because, you know, people have this idea that, okay, the composer has this enlightening idea, and we all know, I mean, as musicians, that it's not just that, obviously, the inspiration which just comes down upon you. But how do you teach that, or do you teach that? Or
I think that that composition is like psychoanalysis, basically. You know, I think there's something that everybody really wants to do. I think a piece of music, when you see a piece of music or you hear a piece of music, there are intentions, and if you talk a lot, and if you are open to them, you can figure out what the composer was hoping to accomplish, and then you can ask questions about whether or not all the decisions supported that accomplishment or challenged that accomplishment. Whether that composer was able to investigate himself or herself well enough to be able to say, well, this is what I'm curious about, and this is where it's going, and that's why I did this, and this supports that, and I tried that, it didn't work, so I'm trying that. You know, the goal is, I think, you know, there are other schools which are different. There are some places, and certainly in the history of music, there are composer teachers who want their students to sound the way they want to sound. This school has always had the sense that it wants composers to have their own styles and to be able to answer questions for themselves. And so I really, I mean, I learned everything I know here, so I feel like I'm a good advocate for that kind of way of passing on information. At least I think I'm a good advocate for it. You'll have to tell me. But I really think that people want to do things, and sometimes you may feel like, you know, I'm curious about this, but I know everybody will like this better, but this is what I'm curious about. Or this is what a piece always does, but this may be where I'm leading, but I don't go there because this is what a piece always does. Then your job as a teacher is to go, well, you know, that's the thing you're curious about. Why aren't you there?
I love the idea of you talking about sitting in the studio and that's your favourite place to be and looking for something new. Like, there's a lot of views on creativity as sort of taking fragments of what's actually already been created around us and getting enough inspiration from it to be able to produce something new. And I know this is something in a work like Death Speaks where that was a case in point. But sitting in the studio and trying to find this something new that's going to push the music in a direction that hasn't existed before. What is that process, and how do you get to that point?
You know, it's really trial and error. You sit in your I sit in my studio and I just think up stupid things and I just try them and I just go, oh yeah, what if every text worked like this? You know, what if you, I've done all sorts of ridiculous things trying to figure out ways to set text or ways to do things. And again, you know, you try them for a couple of weeks and you go, oh, you know, that's not that interesting. Or, you know, I lost my curiosity, or I answered that question, or, you know. So what happens is that when I found something that's interesting enough to show, you know, then I will show that. And hopefully nobody will see the ones that, you know, are not worth showing.
So is there a filing cabinet of David Lang failures?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Oh. But I think that's part of the point, is that if you're taking risks, you are engaged in a series of life experiments, and if you're really an honest scientist, you don't know the answer or the outcome. And you have to be willing to live with that and learn what works.
Well, sometimes you make mistakes, you know, and
Right.
you have to be open to that. You know,
Right.
I wrote a piece years ago that I really loved. That was not a good piece, right? But I really loved it, and it was called Bonehead, right? And so the idea was that nobody knows this piece, right?
Oh, right. Okay, I'm writing it down.
It's been completely withdrawn, but I really loved all the thinking behind it. And I would sit in my studio and just think, boy, this is a great idea for a piece of music. And the whole idea was, you know, when we study music, when we learn music, right, what do we learn? You know, I noticed when my children had piano lessons when they were very young, they would, you know, learn, here's a little, you know, like a skeleton of a little Bach piece, and here's a skeleton of a little Mozart piece. And so I started thinking, you know, you're getting two messages at once. You're getting, this is how my fingers work, and you're getting, and here's the shrine we worship to over and over and over again. I wonder if it's possible to figure out a structure where we can teach people how to learn how to play music. Like, what's it like to move your fingers without teaching you the shrine, you know? So I thought, you know, maybe there are ways in which we take for granted how all these messages get embedded with each other. So I thought, this was the stupid part of the idea, what if you had a bunch of cavemen and you got them all together and you just taught them how to play instruments, right? You know, it's like when you go to an orchestra and you hear the delicate little flute, and it plays this delicate little thing, and all the other instruments clear out so they can hear it, and they let it play, you know? When in human society do people actually work like that? You know, never, right? The person who has the delicate voice never gets heard. So I thought, what if you could design a rule for how orchestral instruments worked based on, you know, how, you know, like a caveman society worked or something, you know? It's like the largest number of people make all the rules. The loudest voices tell the quietest voices what to do, and the quietest voices follow. So I just made up all of these rules, thinking, you know, this might be a way of making a structure for how ideas change through an orchestra that hadn't been done before.
you know, because we take it for granted that all those violins, you know, in a Mozart symphony, you know, you hear the delicate little flute solo, and then all the strings take it up, right? So it presupposes that they speak the same language, that they want to listen to each other, that all of these people, these string players, agree with each other, right? And that they care, right? Well, human society doesn't work like that, you know? So I had this really great idea. I spent all this time in my studio thinking, this is going to be a really great piece. I'm really enjoying this, right? And I really enjoyed writing it, and the piece was terrible. But
And what did you learn from that experience?
I learned from that, you know, have another idea.
Have another idea. So we're getting to the end of our time here. What, if you had some advice to give today's musicians and artists, what would you say? What would you tell them?
I don't know. What advice do you need?
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, it's a complicated world out there. It's a world of opportunity. It's a world of challenge. And you seem to be navigating pretty well on the be true to yourself, take risks, and be a good friend. That I heard big time.
I really, you know, I collaborate with lots of people, you know. It's like, the weird thing about winning the Pulitzer Prize was, it's like, the day before I won the Pulitzer Prize, I was completely unemployable. And, you know, and now all of a sudden, you know, I am a lion of culture.
Yeah.
And
that's what we need to do then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Very easy. All right. Check that off.
But the reason why I bring that up was not to brag, I'm sorry, but to say that until that moment, I spent my entire life working with choreographers, with theater people, with film people, with artists, I mean, my whole life was collaborative, and essentially it made me realize that everything we do is collaborative, you know? It's like everything you do as a composer is a collaboration because you need a listener. It's not music until somebody hears it, you know? So everything we do, performers, you know, it's like we need other people. So I think the key to everything that we do is that what we have is we have a tool to open a conversation with someone else. And your job is to figure out how you're going to use that tool.
I think that's key, is that we don't think of the audience as being a collaborator, that we just often ignore it and just expect something out of it that's not quite realistic. But that's really interesting, phrasing it that way.
And indeed, I think audience engagement is really one of the buzzwords in today's, you know, among the cultural institutions, is how can we engage the audience? And if you come to this thinking the audience is my partner, my collaborator, that's a whole different level of relationship, which is really wonderful. And that must mean, you know, what you were saying about the early days of Bang on a Can, it was, let's invite the audience in. Let's not talk down to these people. Let's just hang out together and listen to a whole bunch of music.
Well, it's also an assumption that like the audience like wants to hear it versus we are forcing you to hear this, and it's a whole. I mean, that's the whole like ideology, it seems, of these like people trying to reach out and program contemporary music. It's like this is like, you know, force feeding you.
Good for you.
It shouldn't be that. I mean, it's just a complete mind shift.
So I think that in conservatory we actually can start thinking about how can we be, you know, the best we can be, have those experiments and draw the audience in, draw in other collaborators to have a much bigger conversation. And I think if we can do that in conservatory, that's a pretty great thing. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much,
Thank
David.
you.
This was just great.